This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
It's not just the Labor Party or the Coalition or now One Nation. Like, they're all war parties. They are committed to signing on to these US forever wars.
If you want the dole for life, free marijuana, vote Greens.
There are a bunch of ratbags and a bunch of idiots, and I've got no time.
The Greens get way too good a run in the Australian media, way too free a run.
Frankly, I've always found the Greens to be a real serious danger.
Hello, it's Serious Danger, a podcast about green politics in Australia. It's not an official Greens Party podcast. It's produced by Michael the Griffin. I'm Tom Ballard, coming to you from Ghana country, freaking the fuck out because it's World War III. We're releasing this episode a day early. Normally we're out on Sundays. We're coming out on a Saturday this week in the interests of how quickly things are changing. And if you're not alive now, because I'm recording this in the past on a Friday morning, and nuclear war is breaking out by Saturday morning, I apologize. If not, if everything's still okay in Australia at least, that's why we're releasing a bit early, because obviously events are moving very quickly. No prizes for guessing what we're talking about this week. World War III, what the hell is happening in the Middle East? As our centre-left progressive Labor government, who believes in international law, is pulling us into another immoral, illegal, violent, war crime-ridden war in Iran. Why? Great question. No fucking idea. Is it illegal? You're damn right. Are we committing war crimes all over the place? You sure are. Senator David Shoebridge is going to be joining me to help us understand what is happening, what the hell is going on with this disgraceful illegal war, supported by the pro-war, pro-genocide Labor Party. Right, this is my new thing, okay? Labor calls the Greens political party. Let's call them the pro-war, pro-genocide Labor Party, because that's exactly what they are. That is exactly what they are. They are pro-war, pro-genocide. They are spineless. They are a vassal state for America. When America says jump, we say, how many people would you like it to help you kill? And it's disgraceful. My comrades in the Labor Against War group, stop hitting yourself. Please. I know there aren't many Labor voters or certainly Labor members who listen to the show, but if you are in there, this is it now. You need to leave. You need to leave. This will keep happening unless there's a political cost, okay? Labor Against War tweeted, appalling to hear Australian government is backing more Trump aggression outside any legal convention. Recognising the rupturing of the rules-based order shouldn't mean you just let it rip elbow. AOP opposed 2003 attack on Iraq, but it supports 2026 attack on Iran. Appalling. I totally agree, Labor Against War. But what are you doing, man? When do you make the call that this strategy isn't working? There should be a mass exodus of the Labor Party over this. This is outrageous. It is evil. It is fucking evil. And I don't care if one of the people doing it is a queer woman of colour. Yas, queen. No. War crimes. Illegal. Get out of there. If you don't mind. Thank you. Also, where's the Labor movement, please? Where is the anti-war movement in this country, including the ACTU? I called the ACTU this week, and I have no idea what to do. I just want to do something, try to get involved. Sent a letter to my MP. Can't wait for that response from Daniel Molina. Called up the ACTU, and I said to the lady on the phone, I'm just calling to say, as a union member, asking if the ACTU is going to release a statement on Iran. And on the phone, she just looks up the media release page of the ACTU website, and she says, they haven't done one yet. And I'm like, yes, I'm aware of that. I'd like them to do one, please. She then didn't ask me what I would like the statement to be and just basically hung up on me. Anyway. In other news, thanks to patrons and Danger Dogs for supporting the show as we prepare the revolution and organise to rise up and end war and spread peace and love across the world. Thank you to Irizhov, Anna, Jan Fran, previous guest of the show, friend of the show. Thanks for being a Danger Dog, Jan Fran, and Fee. You can get bonus content for just $3 a month. You can pay for a yearly membership, and it's a bit cheaper, $27 for the whole year. And you get all that bonus content, including the bonus episode we put out this week, a conversation with journalist Paddy Manning, of course, the author of Inside the Greens. We've been reading this massive history of the Australian Greens on the show, Inside the Greens. Paddy Manning is the guy who did it all. We had a big old chat with him to round out that series about why he wrote the book, the process of writing the book, and the big lessons from that. Lessons that hopefully we could use in this moment in which the Australian government is taking us into war again. As always, give us a follow on social media. Hit us up. We'd love to hear from you, particularly in these dangerous times. I might be in a bunker, but feel free to hit me up. hello@seriousdangerpod.com is our email. Give us a 5-star review on your podcast app of choice. Give us a like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Right, that's enough. Far more important issues. Let us talk to Senator David Shoebridge.
The UN Human Rights Council has concluded that a genocide is occurring in Gaza, and the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant. Does the Premier accept that it's possible to criticise the state of Israel and its actions without being anti-Semitic?
Member for Maiwar, there are a number of aspects of that question that are questionable. Including the legislation we're debating today. So I'm going to rule that question out of order.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Member for Maiwar, I've made my ruling. I've just ruled the question out of order.
I respond to the Leader of the House's point of order, Mr Speaker.
I've made my ruling. If you resume your seat, please.
Love you, Queens, love.
All right, Senator David Shoebridge, thank you for joining me on the show. You're here to tell us that everything's going to be okay. Is that right?
Well, perhaps we might get to that. It does feel like, though, we do feel like in this period of rupture, instability, chaos, and I think people are feeling it when they wake up in the morning. I know I'm feeling it. So maybe we'll get to okay.
Yes, I've been losing my mind this week, and sincerely, I want to thank you and your Greens comrades for being in the Parliament and bringing some level of sanity. I mean, dear God, thank God there are people like yourself calling out the government's bullshit and offering a sense of humanity, some basic level of respect for international law and speaking sense in this moment. It is my sincere belief that you will be absolutely vindicated by history, and thank goodness that you are there. So it's great to have you here to talk through this stuff. So we're recording this on Friday morning. We're going to try and get this out on Saturday. We normally release on Sunday, but things are moving so fast. That's our thinking. At the current moment, the latest estimates I've seen in terms of the death tolls, we're talking about over 1,000 people in Iran, more than 70 in Lebanon, around a dozen in Israel, and at least 6 American soldiers have died in this war. Those are almost certainly underestimates, and horrifically, there is no doubt plenty more to come where that came from. How do you summarize this war, David? What are we seeing? What the hell is actually going on here, and why is it happening?
Well, I mean, it's an illegal war. I mean, that's where we should start. It's the United States and Israel who probably have slightly different motivations in terms of what they want from this war. Israel, I think, just has a position of creating instability and chaos. So it is a dominant power in the region. And that has been an ongoing pattern we've seen from Benjamin Netanyahu. Instability, chaos, so that they are, if there is no potential threat to them in the region. The United States, though, you would have to say, I mean, we've had a different lie every day. So it's Friday. We've had 5 or 6 different lies coming from the United States. If you remember the sort of manufactured consent that we were getting in the weeks leading up to this attack as all the military assets were being put in place, we had endless articles about Pahlavi as the son of the former Shah and how this was going to be some moment of regime change. And then, we saw a very, very real effort to sort of manufacture that consent with people in the Iranian diaspora and some people inside Iran who were just desperate about the nature of the regime they're under. But how quickly that all disappeared as soon as the bombs started. We then had the United States, one of, I think the Secretary of State saying, oh, well, we had to rush in to do the war because Israel was about to start and then our pre-positioned troops were going to get attacked. Yeah. We had Donald Trump saying that the nuclear program that he just obliterated was the reason because you couldn't possibly let Iran get a nuclear weapon. And that's been echoed by our government as one of the principal reasons. We had moments of regime change, but that seems to have dropped off, although just we're on Friday morning and we have Donald Trump coming out and saying he wants to choose the next Iranian leader. So regime change may be back on the table.
Great.
I think what we can be pretty comfortable about is that the public arguments coming out of the Trump administration And to the extent there's even an attempt to justify it out of Israel, that's not the reason. This is, I think, as always, about control, particularly about control over oil and the global energy supplies, and just, old men exercising power in this case because they can. It's in some ways you look at what Hegseth and Trump are doing, and it's just like they feel they can. And when the rest of the world keeps greenlighting them and saying, yes, you can, we're not going to stop you.
Yeah.
Like dangerous men in positions of, hegemonic power exercise actions like we're seeing. So underpinning it, though, I do think energy, oil, power, US control of those key things in the Middle East.
Okay, so not human rights and the liberation of women. Is that what you say? So not actually to protect the lives of the Iranian people and make their lives better. That's not the motivating factor for the US imperial empire and Benjamin Netanyahu. Is that what you're seriously proposing to me right now, David Shoebridge?
Yeah, I mean, I know that's a challenging thought, but the Donald Trump doesn't seem to care much for human rights and the position of women, basic civil liberties inside the United States. So I genuinely doubt that that's his core motivation for this war, this illegal war on Iran. And I do talk with the Iranian diaspora here, and we've been engaging, for years about the woman life freedom struggle, anyone who wants to confront the regime in Iran faces brutality.
Yeah.
Like you can walk and chew gum in this space. You can actually recognize that the regime is a brutal regime, and you could recognize that people are struggling for freedom in Iran. And at the same time, you can say that an illegal war raining bombs and missiles down on the Iranian population is also deeply, deeply wrong. You can hold these two thoughts at the same time.
Yes, please. I mean, the playbook with Iraq, the parallels are just so extraordinary, right? Of course, if you were against the invasion of Iraq, you thought Saddam was fantastic, you're endorsing him. People were celebrating the fall of Saddam quite sincerely because Saddam Hussein was horrible in a whole bunch of different ways. But the critique was about this is not going to help. In fact, this is going to make things worse. And we know that we've lived through it. It was so fucking recently. And I just feel like I'm being gaslit by people with the memories of a fucking goldfish.
It's even worse than that. Because at least in Iraq, Iraq version 2, George W. Bush's invasion, the US made an effort to pull together a coalition of the willing. They actually presented evidence. It turns out to be bullshit, doctored, US evidence. They presented evidence. I remember photos being shown at the UN and
aluminum
Colin Powell
tubes.
coming out and
we used to have aluminum tubes.
Yeah, the aluminum tubes, all of that, the satellite photos. There was an effort to try and put a veneer of respectability and argument around it. And I think they pulled together 49 nations, in the coalition of the willing to engage in the war. They haven't even pretended for this particular one. And as you say, I mean, where are the lessons? You don't have to reach back into, 100 years ago to see the lessons about US military bombing campaigns, invasions, desperately destroying the countries that they're involved in. And what is, I think, deeply frightening at the moment is, that the chaos we saw in Iraq, which then ended up creating chaos in surrounding countries, in Syria and others, that instability that was driven in the region. You look at the size of Iran, 92 million people, this huge country bordering countries that are already incredibly unstable. And you think if we come even close to repeating the chaos and the vacuum and the disorder that happened in Iraq, if we come even close to repeating that in Iran, the world is in an incredibly dangerous place, incredibly dangerous.
Just some other elements of this context that I think is important to underline because we are not getting this context in our media. America and Israel have spent the past 2.5 years committing a genocide in Palestine. Okay, so these are the actors we're talking about. They are now carpet bombing Iran, a sovereign country. They've politically assassinated the head of state. Again, Ayatollah, terrible person, repressed the people of Iran, horrific crimes committed by him. But I'm sorry, that is still a political assassination of a head of state, which is normally considered quite a big deal. Complete violation of international law. Apparently to destroy Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons, which, again, we were told they obliterated in June of last year. Donald Trump, this same guy, is the one who tore up the deal that the Obama administration had reached with Iran to try and denuclearize Iran and take away their power to create nuclear weapons. US and Israel are both nuclear powers. We pretend this insane game in which Israel doesn't have nuclear weapons. Everyone knows they do. It's a totally illegal weapons program which isn't open to any scrutiny at all, and yet they're lecturing and bombing other countries for their alleged attempts to try and develop a nuclear weapon. And again, the Iranian regime is in power because in 1979, there was a people's revolution against the Shah who was installed by America after the CIA, this is not a conspiracy theory, the CIA staged a coup to overthrow the democratically elected leader of Iran in 1953 because he tried to nationalize the oil reserves.
You see, Tom, you were demonstrating one of the core problems about how we respond to this illegal war. Yes. The layers of shit you have to sift through in order to even begin the conversation. Like, even if you just assume that there was some reality to the argument that the United States and Israel are doing this because Iran has an illegal nuclear weapons program, and assume it's not true because the International Atomic Energy Agencies, the others have said it's not true, but assume that they were there was some imminent threat from an illegal nuclear weapons program. Now we know that's not true, but assume that was the case. The key partner in this is Israel, which has, on best estimates, at least 200 nuclear warheads in a grossly illegal nuclear weapons program, which no international inspector is allowed into. There's no oversight of. And which Israel has said that they're on a basically hair trigger to use if they choose in any conflict in the Middle East. How can we be having this debate and at no point even mentioning that?
Oh God, that's ASIO. What are you all right? Okay, all right. Someone's calling.
It is. You have to really go out of your way to just put all that to one side and say, well, and the Albanese government. Penny Wong, Anthony Albanese, Richard Marles have come out and said, well, we can't allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And this is justified because we can't allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And that's why we're supporting the war, which is being led by Israel and the United States. I think part of the challenge in responding to it, and part of the way people are feeling gaslit, is because there are just so many lies. There are so many lies attached to that. And I think, the one that I feel is the greatest betrayal is the regime change thing, and that they're here for the Iranian people, because that is a betrayal of millions of people inside Iran and millions in the diaspora. And it's betrayal of often, overwhelmingly good people who just want a better life for themselves and their family. That is a really deep and ugly betrayal, I think.
Yes, the US is absolutely going to let the Iranian people elect whoever they want. Yeah, I'm sure that's exactly what's going to go down.
Yeah, well, they have done that before, the Iranian people. They did elect somebody who said that they wanted a fair share of their national assets.
Well, we can't have that.
And had the support of the Iranian people. And of course, that led to a US coup. So, again, layers of shit.
Another factor, America, the only country to have ever used a nuclear weapon, by the way, dropping 2 bombs at the end of the Second World War. The first one, I think, is at least highly contested. The second one, completely unnecessary, an absolute war crime, resulting in the deaths of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in Japan. So these are the two folks we're backing in. On the gaslighting, again, we know it's blatantly illegal. There is no legal justification. Every international law expert is coming out and saying, there's no way this abides by international law.
Tom, you say that. Just earlier today, I did an interview on ABC News Radio, and we'll probably touch on it a bit later. It's about whether or not Australians were deployed on a submarine that has sunk an Iranian frigate, right? And I was pointing out, the fact of the illegal war and any contribution in the illegal war. It was quite a long interview. But at the end of the interview, the RN said, well, many of those facts are contested, including the proposition that this is an illegal war. And on our national broadcaster, and I'm thinking, who have they gone to who have they gone to who says that this is not an illegal war? Have they found the ghost of Donald Rumsfeld who's come out and doing political commentary?
Yeah.
Like, no credible person, no credible commentator, no credible international lawyer would say anything other than it's a legal war. But yet, on our national broadcaster,
Great.
we get this statement at the end of an interview. Well, that question about a legal war is contested. No wonder people are feeling gaslit.
I've heard people contesting it, saying that international law doesn't fucking matter anymore. I don't know. I've seen many people saying this is totally legit. But regardless, our government's line is, hey, we don't know. We have no position on whether or not this is in line with international law. That is a matter for the US and the Israel to explain the legality of these strikes, which we have said we support, which is such an outrageous position. Either you think these strikes are in accordance with international law, you either don't think they're in accordance with international law, or you don't know. And if it's either of those second two options, you cannot in good conscience support the strikes.
No, but Tom, if China invaded Taiwan,
yes,
right, I'm sure the Australian government would say, well, it's really a matter for China to determine whether or not that's in accordance with international law. When Putin invaded Ukraine, I'm pretty sure I heard Penny Wong say, well, we'll let Vladimir determine whether or not. That's not a matter for Australia.
Who can possibly say?
But it is kind of interesting that the when Trump was threatening to invade Greenland, they had a slightly different position. They still refused to take a position.
Right.
But Penny Wong said, well, that's a really matter for the Danish authorities to work out whether or not that's in accordance with international law. So in that case, it was for the target to work out. In another case, it's for the United States to work out. But what is pretty clear in the world of Penny Wong and Richard Marles and Anthony Albanese, it's never for Australia to take a position on international law. And the key thing about international law is it does not enforce itself. Right. It is only enforced by other nation states who have to actively take a role and actively take a position. That's how international law is enforced. And this bizarre statements that we're getting from the Albanese government that, it's a matter for the United States and a matter for the aggressors to work out whether or not their actions are in accordance with international law. Again, it's like you almost get speechless with frustration even having to have the argument,
Well, I'll tell you who disagrees with Anthony Albanese is Anthony Albanese, all right? And people might have seen these quotes going around. In 2003, he's in Parliament. They're speaking out against the Howard government gearing up for the Iraq War. A speech he delivered, he said, there is no UN mandate here. We are not bringing peace. We are invading a sovereign country and making war. This is an unjust war without UN backing. Goes on to acknowledge the evil of Saddam Hussein, yada, 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 but calling the hypocrisy of the Australian government and the US when it comes to Israel's human rights abuses at the time. I mean, like, how do these people fucking sleep at night? And I don't know how you feel. I'm like very confident in the idea that if we had a Labor government in 2003, 2004, if it was Simon Crean or Kim Beazley or whatever, they absolutely would have signed up 100% to that illegal war.
Yeah, and I think that is, and the closer I observe what happens down here in Canberra and how the defence and security industry, that part of the state wraps around and will not allow democracy to contest their conclusions. Yeah. The more I see that, the more I realise that actually, whether it's Labor or the coalition, and increasingly I call them the war parties, that once they get into power, they have to deliver on the project. Yeah. And the project would be, you need to show your relevance to the United States. We need to keep our connection with the United States. That overrides any of your other niceties about international law or human rights or concern for other people. The overwhelming drive here is you have to show loyalty and relevance to the United States, and that will determine the outcome every time. And you talk to people inside the sort of defence establishment here, and if you talk to them about the Australian deployment in the Iraq or Afghanistan war, so let's talk about the war in Iraq. 2 decades long, disaster zone. Millions of Iraqis' lives lost either through malnutrition, lack of access to basic essentials, killed in the war, incredible ongoing conflict, a disaster zone. And trillions of dollars from the United States, billions from Australia and other allies ploughed into a disaster zone. And yet if you ask Defence, did Australia win that war? Did Australia win that war? Their answer is unambiguously yes. That was a win for Australia because it was never about the future of Iraq. It was never about democracy. It was never about any of that. It was about demonstrating our loyalty and relevance to the United States, and we sure as heck did that, and therefore we won that one. And same for Afghanistan. We won both of those wars.
Well done us. That's good news. I was worried this is going to be a depressing conversation.
I thought they were total clusterfucks, humanitarian disasters, obscene waste of lives and money. But it turns out if you ask the Russell establishment here, we won both of them. Great.
Speak of that, again, another little nugget of wisdom from Benjamin Netanyahu, who said to the US Congress in 2002, if you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region.
Yeah.
That's the fella that we're supporting in these illegal
multiply that
strikes.
by 5, and that's what's happening in Iran right now.
Yeah.
The size of the population, the size of the economy, the influence on the region. That's. I know we promised to end in a positive way, but that is a super real fear at the moment.
Yeah. Of course, the argument is, hey, we can't possibly go against America. Yes, they're just too powerful. Now, what have you made of some other countries, including Spain? The Labor Party in New Zealand, once again, in opposition, so probably, saying the right thing while they have no power. Canada kind of initially supporting the strikes, then walking back and then saying it's clearly illegal, kind of the UK. Some resistance across Western allies. France also, I think Macron's just also identified these strikes as illegal. What do you think of those different responses, contrasting with Australia's straight out the gates, fully endorsing this illegal barbarity?
Well, I mean, the Spanish example is the clearest, right? A member of NATO, tied into that sort of Western security framework. And they just came out and said, this is an illegal war. We're going to have no part in it. And we're not going to allow the US to use the bases in Spain to prosecute the war. No, the Trump has come out then and said he's going to cut off all trade with Spain and other unspecified attacks on Spain. And the European Union has said, well, you really can't do that because we negotiate as a bloc. So I don't know quite where that's going. But what it shows is it can be done. And in fact, when you have chats with other MPs here or other senators here from, I'll call them generically the war parties, Labor, the Coalition and One Nation, they're all of the same. And you'll say to them, well, look, obviously, it'll come at a cost if we start extracting ourselves from the United States. They're going to impose a cost upon us. They'll stop supporting certain hardware. It'll be hard to get software updates for F-35 fighters. Some of our battle management systems will not work. We'll be excluded from some US satellite access, which is important for how our current defense system works. We're really entrenched in the United States supply chain and military, and our military is designed to only operate within that framework. And obviously that would come at costs. And but their answer is, well, I mean, obviously, therefore, we can't ever go against the United States. And their only solution is to double down on it and increase our dependence on the United States. And they openly admit that if we ever did show independence, we would have a hostile United States taking action against us. And I say to them, well, doesn't that prove that we better get started now before we're even more dependent and more hostage to the United States? And you get this kind of look of refusal to even engage in the debate. It's like the imagination here is so limited. It's the United States is our indispensable ally. Nothing we can do can interfere with that. And at the moment, that just means doubling down. And I think they might say, well, maybe there'll be a future election and we'll have someone other than Trump and it'll all be back to normal. That's maybe at best their strategic thinking. And it is so dangerous. So,
back to normal. Yeah, like when Biden was in power and we were doing a genocide. Yeah, that was nice and normal, wasn't it? There was no cost. No cost there. Power. Right, yes.
Yeah, Obama was in power and they were doing record number of extrajudicial assassinations,
nice and normal
stuff. But it won't even return to that normal. I mean, no one even pretends. And that's, I don't know if you saw the two contributions yesterday in the joint sitting between Albanese and Carney, the Australian Prime Minister and the Canadian Prime Minister. And they both made, contributions to the joint session. And they both start with sort of pleasantries. Canada and Australia were very similar, very nice, blah, 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 blah. And then Albanese said, and we're similar, and the world's a bit messy, so it's nice to have a friend. That's what Albanese said. Very, hard-hitting analysis. But then at least Carney said, well, actually, the world's ruptured. Whatever we thought was working before, and I'd say for the bulk of the world, it wasn't working before. But whatever we thought was working before is not working now after this rupture. And he said, we have these hegemonic powers who are trying to impose their will on the rest of the world without constraint. And Carney starts mounting this argument that middle powers need to come together, find common ground, and start laying the architecture and the thoughts for a better world, which is going to be based on values we can all wrap ourselves around. And is at least engaging from a position of reality about where the world is. And it was just such a contrast between Albanese and Carney.
Yeah.
Carney recognising the reality of the world. Maybe his answers aren't all, what we want them to be. But there's this myth, this fantasy that's still sort of driving the thinking here in Canberra.
Yeah. All right. Now, I'm conscious of time. I know you're very busy, and I don't mean to rush over or skip through war crimes that we're going to be talking about here, but I think it is really important to touch on, two particular elements of this war that we're seeing that are so deeply disturbing. First of all, I mean, straight out the gate, we sort of had a glimpse of what this war is going to look like with this horrific airstrike on an elementary school in Minab in southern Iran. The death toll, I think, stands at 168 people. Many of those people were children. One quote from a mother, and, trigger warning for what you're about to hear, but she told NBC News, by the time we'd arrived at the site, the entire school had collapsed on top of the children. People were pulling out children's arms and legs. People were pulling out severed heads. Asked about the deaths on Monday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters that US forces would not deliberately target a school, adding the Defense Department would be investigating into it. Hegseth says they're looking into it. Central Command said it was looking into reports of it. The Israeli military has so far declined to comment. Now, that story broke. People were like, this looks horrific. This is what it looks like when you bomb a country. And people saying, no, you idiots. That was an errant Iranian rocket. That was actually an IRGC rocket. See, you idiot. The evidence for this was a screenshot of a Telegram chat, I believe. And there was reports that the Iranian regime was admitting that they were responsible for this strike. Well, that's just all bullshit. Just before we started recording, New York Times ran a piece saying that a body of evidence assembled by the New York Times, including newly released satellite imagery, social media posts, and verified videos, indicates the school building was severely damaged by a precision strike that occurred at the same time as attacks on an adjacent naval base operated by the IRGC, and official statements that US forces were attacking naval targets near the Strait of Hormuz, where the IRGC base is located, suggest they were most likely to have carried out the strike. We also know the base they're talking about closed 15 years ago. It was nearby the school, which people were citing as justification for the attacks. Satellite imagery from 2011 appears to show the building is part of the same compound before it was fenced off later. This is an egregious war crime. Has the Australian government commented on this at all? Have they been challenged about this horrific attack?
Well, not one word. It falls under the general framework of, well, really, it's a matter for the United States to determine the legality of their actions and the legality of the war. And I also saw that active disinformation campaign that was being put out, within hours of the bombing happening, and those utterly distressing images and reports from mums and dads who are going to the school. I mean, it's hard to imagine the level of grief that is being produced throughout this bombing campaign all across Iran. But, and again, this sense of being gaslit, we saw exactly the same disinformation campaign repeatedly coming out in the genocide in Gaza.
Yeah.
Every time Israel bombed a school or bombed a hospital, there was this immediate, no, actually it wasn't Israeli, it was an errant rocket from Hamas, or it was this active disinformation campaign to try. And the reason they do it is because it's horrific, right? The reality of what happened is obscene. And then I shared images of some really distressing images of excavation equipment digging mass graves for all the girls who had been killed in the and then the fresh disinformation came out that this was somehow doctored images from COVID times. And whatever they can do to try and distract you from the obscene reality of the war, they will do. And the failure of the Australian government to even pretend to comment on it, or to have a position on it, or to maybe have a value statement about it, I think speaks volumes.
The Israeli ambassador to Australia, the new one, was on 7:30 this week, and he was asked about this particular strike, and he said, "Oh, well, it actually wasn't being used as a school; it was being used by the IJC as a military base." So it's like, okay, so how did all the school children get there, mate? And then also hit that comment clearly suggesting so the attack was us and it was completely justified because it was a military target. I was like, well, that's a changed story, and what the hell are you talking about?
I mean, those comments are made and then never challenged.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a sort of, he said, she said, alternative reality. There is no alternative reality in here. The war in its first 24 hours killed over 150 largely schoolgirls who were just at school. And it's inconvenient. So we get this, there's a gameplay for it, for the disinformation campaign that throws out afterwards. Yeah. But silence in the face of a war crime, most people would say silence in the face of an obscene war crime like that is complicity in it. And that's what we have from our own government.
Yes. Which I am shocked and appalled by. I should not be shocked and appalled by based on the Australian government's behaviour over this genocide in Gaza, but there you go. Okay, so this other story, in terms of Australia's direct involvement here, what can you tell us about the attack, the sinking of the Iris Dina, and what does this mean for Australia's direct involvement in military action in this war?
Well, I mean, let's start by saying, remembering what the Albanese government has said, there is no direct Australia involvement in this war. Now, there's 10 reasons why that's bullshit, but here's example A. What we do know about it was that the Iranian frigate was coming from a friendship visit to a port in India, and part of that friendship visit had meant that it had a very low munitions load. You're not allowed to take a fully armed warship into a friendship visit. And there was a US vessel and other international vessels at that same friendship flotilla. So the US knew they were there. They knew that they had minimal munitions on it. They were part of a friendship visit. And then once they left the port and they were off the coast of Sri Lanka, it was sunk by a US nuclear attack submarine. And although it was thousands of kilometres away from the war zone, there was no active threat to the US nuclear submarine. In breach of the Geneva Conventions, they just left the scene and left all of the surviving Iranian sailors in the sunk ship to drown at sea. And it was many hours later that the Sri Lankan Navy turned up to start the rescue. That's what we know. And we know this partly because the US Pacific Command put a tweet out about it, showing and celebrating the image of them sinking the Iranian frigate. We also know that because up until the end of last year, the Albanese government was saying this was a good news story, that there are at least 50 Australian personnel embedded on the US attack class submarines across the Pacific Command. At least 50. And that number has been growing month by month as more Australians are deployed into US nuclear submarines as part of AUKUS. Right. So we know that they're deployed across the Pacific Fleet. And in fact, the plan is that in about 10 years' time, roughly 10 to 13% of all the personnel on US attack class submarines will be Australian as part of the training to get us up to speed for AUKUS. And we had breaking news just yesterday from Channel 9 that they have credible reports that 2 Australians were aboard this vessel. And before that broke, because we know the history, I asked Penny Wong directly in the Senate in question time, are there any Australian personnel on there? And what she said was, that is secret. We don't disclose operational information and we're not going to tell you whether or not Australian personnel are on there. So what do we know? Well, Channel 9 says they have credible evidence to believe there were 2 Australian personnel. We know there's a high likelihood that there were Australian personnel on this. If they were on the nuclear submarine, well, they would have been taking an active warfighting role in sinking the frigate. The actions of the US submarine were pretty, I think, unquestionably in breach of international law, but also grossly in breach of what I think most people would consider ethical standards. And we are absolutely in it up to our neck. And, as we're talking, there's been, I think, 5 different Labor spokespeople / ministers this morning who have all been asked, were Australians on board? And they've all refused to answer.
But then this morning, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has given an interview to Sky News. During that interview, he's made the decision to confirm that, yes, there were Australian personnel, 3, it turns out, on board the US submarine. But Anthony Albanese has also been very keen to emphasise that these personnel were not involved in the action against Iran. In other words, they sat out the offensive action which saw this US submarine torpedo the Iranian frigate with substantial loss of life. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We wouldn't normally confirm such an issue, but given our NSC meetings and the public interest, I can confirm that there were 3 Australian personnel on board that vessel. I can confirm also, though, that no Australian personnel have participated in any offensive action against Iran. These are long-standing third country arrangements that have been in place for a long period of time. And what they do is ensure that Australian Defence Force personnel, where they're embedded in third countries' defence assets, they act in accordance with Australian law, with Australian policy, and that, of course, is taking place across the board.
Dear God. I believe in Penny Wong's response, she also said, I direct you to the comments from the US about what that submarine was going to strike. Right? Is she trying to just completely making up this idea that
totally
that
made up?
That's outrageous.
Totally made up. Again, it's a watch my hand moment.
Yeah.
As I pointed out, this was an Iranian frigate by itself, 2,000 plus kilometres away from the war zone, having done a friendship visit, which meant that it had a particularly low munitions load. With
the US, they've been invited by the US to that friendship.
I think invited by India, but the US was also at the at the same friendship thing.
Right.
So the US knew it was there because they turned up at the friendship thing. And I'm told that actually when they arrived there, the US boat had to jostle so that it wasn't found in a picture with the Iranian frigate because that would have looked uncomfortable. But the idea that we can't find out about this because it would somehow, endanger the operational activities of Australians is it's just complete bullshit.
Yeah.
There is no possible way in which, if the Australian public knew that Australian personnel were involved in that would produce any significant danger, any danger at all, any risk of danger to the personnel deployed on that submarine. They're on a US nuclear submarine submerged somewhere in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
It is the only people protected from the secrecy is obviously the Labor government. And,
yes.
And I'm sorry, when we found out about these deployments at the beginning of last year or at the end of the year before, I distinctly recall asking the Australian Defence Force, it was either the head of the Australian Submarine Agency or the Chief of Defence. I said, well, what is your plan when Australians are embedded on US nuclear submarines? They're underwater, they're months away on deployment, and the US decides to go to war. What is your plan if we don't support the war, if we don't want to participate in the war? What are you going to do with the 2, 5, 10, 20 Australians who have an integral part of warfighting on a US nuclear? What's your plan? And it was like, I'd farted in the elevator, refused to engage with it, refused to discuss it. There's long-standing protocols. AUKUS and the rationale of AUKUS and our embedding into the US military and our being just a part of it inevitably makes us part of US wars. And we're seeing that play out in this incident.
And how else is Australia complicit in this? I mean, there's been lots of talk about the role that Pine Gap. I mean, the intelligence in Pine Gap almost certainly played a role in that attack off the coast of Sri Lanka. That is an area that Pine Gap monitors and reaches to, is my understanding. And then we also have these reports of surveillance aircraft coming by a base in Western Australia. Can you just briefly tell us about some of those elements?
Yeah, so Pine Gap is central to US global warfighting. It's one of the key intelligence hubs where they basically, from their satellites and other surveillance devices around the world, the information gets aggregated into Pine Gap, and that's where they analyze targets, particularly target acquisitions and the responses that are happening in real time in the middle of a war. So we know from a whistleblower that Pine Gap was used to help the Israelis pick targets in Gaza, and it is absolutely certain that it's being used for the US to pick targets in Iran at the moment. What the Australian government says is no Australian personnel at Pine Gap are directly involved in those acquisitions of targets. They completely silent about the hundreds of US personnel who are doing it, or the fact that the place doesn't run without all the Australian personnel keeping it running. I mean, obviously we're in that up to our neck. In addition to that, we have Northwest Cape, which is near Exmouth, in the northwest of WA. That is one of the principal global communication systems for the United States to communicate with submerged submarines. It puts out these very long radio waves which can penetrate into the oceans and directly communicate with US nuclear submarines around the world. It's highly likely that that was part of sending the message to the submarine to kill the Iranian frigate. We know that that has been used to send and exchange information, including target information to submarines in the June attack on Iran of last year, and it's absolutely been used in the current attack. And then just earlier this week, there was the unscheduled visit to RAAF Pierce, which is a RAAF base just north of Perth in WA, of 2 US military surveillance aircraft, which are absolutely critical to the air war that's happening over Iran at the moment. They came from Diego Garcia in the middle of the Indian Ocean, almost certainly having come from the conflict zone, and they came back into Australia to refuel. And the government has refused to say whether they came from the conflict zone or whether they're going back to the conflict zone. These aircraft are in core demand at the moment for the US war, and it's close to London to a brick that they went and found their way back after being refueled in Australia back into the war zone. And on top of that, we have hundreds and hundreds of Australian personnel embedded throughout the US military in all of their different branches at all different decision-making levels, and they will absolutely be part of this US illegal war. Absolutely.
Isn't there there's 100,000 Aussies across the Middle East or something like that, or some crazy number of people, citizens, not just obviously military personnel, but just human beings who are across the Middle East, which are going to be victims of this regional war.
Well, just think. I mean, we haven't touched upon it, but we probably should. There's been this criticism of Iran's escalation and attacks on other countries. And I'll be honest, I'm a peace and nonviolence party. We are against bombings and killings and it being part of nation states' actions. We're happy to oppose, and we clearly, from a point of principle, oppose those attacks, right?
Yes.
But of course, what the government refuses to recognise is that they're against countries that have US military bases, not entirely, but many of them are countries that have US military bases who are actually the launch pads for the war happening on Iran. We could just wash that out, that commentary. But then we also saw Israel doing this scale attacks in Lebanon at the moment and using the chaos that's happening in Iran so that the world is not paying attention to what they're doing. And as we're talking, they've given evacuation orders for parts of Beirut, which has seen hundreds of thousands of people in Beirut desperately anxious about their safety, trying to escape through crowded roads, congestion, and the fear that Israeli missiles are going to come down and kill them and their families and their friends and their neighborhoods, on top of all the just repeated routine brutality that happens in the southern of Lebanon. So, and all of those people in the Australian Lebanese community now, all deeply fearful about their families, many of them over in Beirut. I was just in Beirut just in September of last year. It's an extraordinary place. And the thought that city, those people are going through this, it's horrific.
Just a reminder, Iran, the biggest threat to peace and stability in the Middle East, we're told, right? Not the countries currently bombing and unleashing this war and carnage and committing these war crimes. No. Iran is the biggest threat to peace and stability in the Middle East. All right, we're coming close to the end of the time. I will pitch you my last 3 big questions. It's entirely up to you how much you get through or how quickly you deal with them. But the 3 things I want to say to you is, what do you think happens next? Seriously, is it regime change? Is it boots on the ground? Where do you think this kind of goes? Are they going to install the Shah? Is he going to get in there? And what do we do as a political party, as an anti-war movement, as a peace movement? What is the political action that we can take to identify Labor as a pro-war, pro-genocide party, to convince our fellow citizens that this will keep happening unless there is a political cost to signing up to these kind of issues, these kind of horrific actions in the future?
Yeah. Well, in terms of what is going to happen, I think it's vanishingly unlikely that the Shah is going to march into Tehran and be acclaimed to be the new ruler of Iran, and for that to be even on the cards at this point. I mean, that is like an utter fantasy that has been driven by, the propagandists trying to provide cover for this war. I think we can pretty much rule that out. And it's fascinating how even just within barely a week of this war happening, nobody is even seriously talking about that anymore, despite all of the palaver we had in the weeks leading up to that. That it wasn't an unintentional pun, by the way. It was
yes.
I didn't mean to do the palaver thing. So I think we can put that to one side.
Yep.
There is a real, I would say, one of the most likely outcomes. I mean, nobody can super predict what will happen. That's what happens with war, right? You start a war and the outcomes are wildly unpredictable. That's in the nature of it, because all constraints are taken off, all rules are taken off, and it's incredibly unpredictable. But one of the most likely outcomes is the regime in Iran has basically a monopoly on power.
Yes.
And a monopoly on lethal force inside Iran. That monopoly is not going to be broken by a bombing campaign and an aerial campaign. It's just not. And, and so that monopoly is going to retain. It could potentially become even more radical regime, use this moment to actually double down on the message, and they would have some credibility for it, that they are the people fighting for the Iranian people against a foreign aggressor, and use it then to have even more brutal repression on the ground. Anybody who has ever shown criticism of the regime seen as an enemy of in Iran. That's, I think, one of the most disturbing likely outcomes. Pockets of utter chaos potentially breaking out. I know
a death
that
toll higher. We know that the regime has killed thousands of protesters over the past couple of years, which is horrific and awful. There is a very real chance that this war will result in the death of more Iranians than the death toll from the Iranian regime. So at that point, you go, hang on, who's more evil at this point?
And if you remember back into the June attacks, there were attacks on prisons inside Iran, with political prisons, to blow up and to open up escape ways potentially, to attack those prisons. And part of the way the regime responded to those Israeli attacks on prisons was to kill the prisoners so that they couldn't escape.
Correct.
So those kind of obscene cycles of violence are potentially a significant part of what's going to be on the ground. And what we can say with absolute certainty is more Iranian kids, more Iranian mums and dads and uncles, they're all going to be killed, not just by the regime, but by what is going to be showered on them from the air by Israelis and Americans. So what it also means in the Gulf states, like there is, I think, real anxiety about what might happen in the Gulf states if Iran manages to actually soak up and expend all of the incredibly expensive Western anti-missile defenses that have been arrayed around the Gulf states. And they're being used at an unsustainable rate. The United States can't supply replacements to make up for the rate at which those defensive assets are being used. Well, then there's a huge number of incredibly vulnerable assets in the Gulf states in particular, starting with desalination plants. And if the desalination plants get destroyed in the course of this war, that creates the viability of many of those states becomes fundamentally questionable. That's another humanitarian catastrophe. So, and then what does it mean for Pakistan? What does it mean for Afghanistan? What does it mean for Iraq? What does it mean for any of those adjoining states that are already incredibly fragile? If suddenly, we have a country of 92 million people in chaos and creating potentially even more, potentially more extremism, more chaos coming out of Iran.
More refugees, producing more refugees that I'm told everyone fucking hates. And the Australian government is on the side of the Iranian people unless they flee a regime and come here on boats seeking asylum, in which case we'll lock you up and contravene your human rights as a refugee.
Yeah. But I mean, all of those things, no one can fully predict what will happen because it's a war, and wars are inherently unpredictable. But what we almost uniformly see with war is whatever you thought the plan was when you started it, something more horrific and more horrible is what actually ends up coming out of it. But we ask now, well, what can we do as a movement in response to this? Well, I'll pick up that last point you said. There are about 2,000 people who have fled from Iran, come to Australia, who have sought asylum. Many of them came by sea and have sought asylum. what we could do as a movement is say, well, if the government wants to show solidarity with the Iranian people, and these are overwhelmingly people who are opponents to the government. If you were serious about that, well, whether people arrived by sea or they didn't, give them asylum.
Yes.
Give them a safe home and do that. That would be an act of immediate solidarity with the Iranian people. And absolutely, we should be calling for that and doing that. But we should also be calling out, and I think the more that people see, and we've kind of touched upon it in this discussion, that it's not just the Labor Party or the Coalition or now One Nation. Like, they're all war parties. They are committed to signing on to these US forever wars. Let's see that power dynamic for what it is and realize that we need to fundamentally change politics. And what it starts with, if we want to get away from this toxic cycle where we just become part of the global problem, refuse to stand up, we absolutely need to break our relationship with the United States. That has to be a unifying part of the left's progressive movements, political actions in Australia. We need to end AUKUS. And thankfully, there are millions of Australians who are with us. They see AUKUS as this obscene vanity project that will never work. And now they're seeing just how it embeds us into whatever illegal war the United States is doing. We need to end AUKUS. We need to call for an independent defence and foreign policy. We need Australia to be standing up for the values we hopefully as a nation believe in. So I think it's sharpening the focus of what our demands need to be, because it turns out our demands about how Australia plays and connects with the rest of the world are pretty much fundamentally connected to our values here in domestic policy as well. And if we behave like this, ignoring genocide, ignoring war crimes, ignoring injustice in the rest of the world, well, we see that play out here as well. So that's what I think we should be doing right now. Act of immediate solidarity, campaign to get those thousands of Iranians and other refugees the protection that they need and deserve, almost all of them fleeing from obscene wars supported by the West. And let's end AUKUS and break our toxic, dependent relationship with the United States. Let's make that a core political project.
She's not going to love you, honey. Walk away. This is an abusive relationship. All right. You got to go. Thank you so much for giving me time. Thank you for doing your work, Senator David Shoebridge. Thank you for being a voice of reason in these insane times. We really appreciate it here at Serious Danger. Thanks, mate.
Cheers, Tom. Thanks again.